without any evidence to support it really, that somehow this is going to hurt the middle class, that corporations don't actually spend the money on people, that somehow the corporations just sock it away in their Scrooge McDuck money bins, and every evening they go swimming in the coins. The physics of that I always found puzzling, by the way. I'm not sure how Scrooge McDuck was actually able to penetrate the metal of the coins. He was always able to sort of jump between the coins, but I get the feeling that if you tried to jump into a pile of coins, you'd really hurt yourself in a severe way. In any case, that's beside the point. The actual point that I did want to make is that the Democrats are claiming that this tax cut will be wildly ineffective, that corporations have no intention of helping you. They have no intention of helping you at all. And leading the charge here is Chuck Schumer. So Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader from New York, here's what he had to say about the tax rates. Now, there's great irony to this. You're going to hear him rip one particular company here. That company is AT&T. I'll explain why this is so hilarious and ironic in 1 second, because he basically says something and it gets debunked as he is saying it. It's pretty astonishing.
Well, if you believe trickle-down economics, he's right. The trouble is no one in America, not the American public, not the economists, believe that trickle-down works. Corporations are flush with cash right now. The stock market's booming. Job creation isn't. Look at all the companies that have already said they're going to use their tax break for stock buybacks, for dividends that don't affect average Americans. And I love the example of AT&T. Over the last 10 years, AT&T has paid an average tax rate of 8% a year. They have 80,000 fewer employees today than they had then. Tax breaks don't lead to job creation. They lead to big CEO salaries and money for the very, very wealthy.
Okay, so here's the part that's hilarious and ironic. So as he's saying, AT&T, they didn't spend any money on their employees. They paid very little taxes and they're spending no money on their employees. First of all, this is sort of reversing the polarity. One of the reasons corporations pay less in tax is because they're making less money or they've had realizable losses in the last year, right? I mean, it's not like they can just pay less taxes and get away with it. In any case, what did AT&T do? As Chuck Schumer was speaking, in the same hour, AT&T announced that once President Trump signed the bill into law, they would, quote, invest an additional $1 billion in the United States in 2018 and pay a special $1,000 bonus to more than 200,000 AT&T U.S. employees. Oops. Picked the wrong company to pick on that time, Chucky. And it's not just AT&T saying this. Boeing has announced $300 million of investment in corporate giving, in workforce development, in new facilities and infrastructure. Fifth Third Bancorp is a bank headquartered in Ohio. They announced they would give a minimum hourly wage, raise it all the way to $15. You remember the left was saying they wanted $15 minimum wage? They got it approved by President Trump. How? Through economic growth. They're also going to give a one-time bonus of $1,000 to more than 13,500 of their employees. Wells Fargo, there's a lot more employees than that, announced they will increase their minimum hourly pay rate to $15, and they will aim for $400 million in philanthropic donations next year due to the newly passed GOP tax bill. Ryan Saavedra writes about this over at Daily Wire. Comcast has announced they're going to give $1,000 bonuses to over 100,000 eligible frontline and non-executive employees and invest $50 billion over the next 5 years in infrastructure based on the passage of tax reform. FedEx announced that they will ramp up hiring in response to the bill. They say they're going to see a $1.3 billion increase in annual profit, and they are promising extended hiring. CVS announced last month that they would create 3,000 permanent new jobs if the tax bill passed. So much for Chuck Schumer's talking point that businesses do not respond to economic incentives. Of course they respond to economic incentives. Of course they do. Okay, and as I discussed yesterday, when Ireland lowered its corporate tax rate from 40% to 12.5%, they basically tripled their GDP growth. When businesses have more money to spend, they either invest it, or they do stock buybacks, which raises stock prices, or they spend it on investment in employees and innovation. The money doesn't just go nowhere, as opposed to when Democrats spend the money when it legitimately goes almost nowhere. Right? So this is good stuff. And I will say another thing here about a differentiation that I think is important. So if you recall all the way back to the show it would have been December. So last December, a year ago, President Trump announced that he and Mike Pence had basically cut a deal with Carrier to keep 500 jobs in the United States with Carrier. And I said I didn't like this deal. The reason I didn't like this deal is because it wasn't a broad-based tax cut. It was a special giveaway to Carrier. It was basically a subsidy to Carrier. I don't like subsidies. And so when Carrier said they'd keep the jobs there, I said this is a cheap trick. It's a parlor trick, and I don't like it. It looks a lot like corporatism. This is not that. When companies say a broad-based policy that affects millions of people across the United States is good for us or bad for us, that is necessary. Companies should be doing that. Corporate heads should routinely be speaking out about how public affairs impacts their company. Why? Because the government constantly does. But if you're a Democrat, you spend your entire life going around telling people, you know, this government program that I love, you love it too. You know why? Because it puts money in your pocket, right? This is what Democrats do for a living. For a living, Democrats go around telling people that food stamps are great, and the way you know it is because there's an EBT card in your pocket. Welfare is great, and the way you know it is every week when you go to pick up your welfare check, it's a little bit more because of me. Right? The Democrats are constantly letting people know that they are dependent on government programs. Capitalists don't tend to spend a lot of time letting people know that they are reliant on capitalism. I don't run around the office telling people around the office, guys, you know what? You are reliant on me for your hiring, but not only that, you're reliant on the capitalist system. You're reliant on free market enterprise for your continuation of your employment. Because that would make me a jerk. Like, we're kind of polite. We don't go around saying these sorts of things. But they are true. Okay, my employees will have a better year because there were corporate tax cuts. Maybe not in California, but overall, there will be a better year for us as a company because of these corporate tax cuts. The rate just went from 35% to 21%. That's a massive decrease. Okay, and people should be telling their employees this. The reason they should be telling their employees this is because otherwise, the Democrats have a stake in basically suggesting that employees and employers are on two sides of the ledger. They're not related. That you can damage the employer without harming the employee. That's not true. When you raise taxes, it harms the employee. And when you lower taxes, it helps the employee. And this is what we've seen. You know, President Trump deserves a moment in the sun to celebrate. And thus he did. So he came out yesterday and he said, hey, it's a lot of fun when you win. Can't argue with that.
Paul, Ryan, and Mitch, it was a little team. We just got together and we would work very hard, didn't we, huh? It seems like it was a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun when you win. If you work hard and lose, that's not acceptable.
Okay, and I do love the rabid laughter in the background from the vice president and from all of the assembled. One of the things that I think Republicans have learned is sort of how to play with Trump. And the way that you play with Trump is by basically laughing at all his jokes and telling him he's the best. If that's what it takes to get some good policy, I can live with that. I mean, you know, is it sycophantic? Is it ridiculous the president is this way? Yes, but hey, the policy over the last 3 weeks has been pretty good. Okay, now, in a second, I'm going to explain something that Trump said that is not true about this bill. And then I want to get back to some of the Democratic reactions to all of this, because some of the Democratic reactions are truly astonishing. So let's start with something President Trump said about Obamacare. So when it comes to this bill, one of the things that the bill does is it repeals the individual mandate. As I explained yesterday, the repeal of the individual mandate does not mean Obamacare has been repealed. It has not. You are not forced to buy an insurance program now, but insurance companies are still forced to cover pre-existing conditions. There are still all sorts of cost caps on what insurance companies can do. There are still heavy regulations on insurance companies across the country, which is one of the reasons why cutting the insurance mandate, the individual mandate, may result in higher prices in the individual insurance market. Because if you're forcing a bunch of healthy people, young healthy people, to buy insurance in order to cover the costs for older non-healthy people, and then you take all the young people out of the system, the costs rise for the insurance companies. There are only two ways of filling that gap. One is to remove the regulations. That would be killing Obamacare, is killing the regulations. And the other way to do it would be to backfill that gap by basically signing subsidies to the insurance companies with government cash. Unfortunately, it looks like the Republicans have sided with the second way. They're looking at the Alexander Murray bill to do exactly that. That'd be Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray of the state of Washington, this bipartisan bill. But Trump made an announcement that was somewhat disquieting here and should, I think, give people a little bit of pause going into next year, because this has been a great last 3 weeks. Okay, I said it yesterday. The last 3 weeks, the last month of policy from this administration has been the most conservative policy of any policy I have seen in my lifetime. Now, granted, I don't remember the Reagan years particularly, but certainly in the last 33 years, I mean, as long as I've been alive, this is the most conservative policy that I've seen in the last 3 weeks ever, right? Much more conservative than anything George W. Bush did. But going into next year, the question is, are we going to keep up this? Is this where we're going to go? The indicators are maybe not. The reason I say this is because here is President Trump talking about the repeal of the individual mandate and what comes next. Here he explains.
The individual mandate is being repealed. When the individual mandate is being repealed, that means Obamacare is being repealed, because they get their money from the individual mandate. So the individual mandate is being repealed. So in this bill, Not only do we have massive tax cuts and tax reform, we have essentially repealed Obamacare, and we'll come up with something that will be much better.
Okay, that is not true. We have not essentially repealed Obamacare. We repealed a funding mechanism for the insurance companies, but all the regulations are still in place. Unless the Republicans remove those regulations, then they are basically enshrining a new government program. I mean, if they basically are just going to give giveaways to sick people who can't afford insurance, then that is a new government entitlement program. The problem with that is that you're not always talking about sick old people. Those people are covered by Medicare already. You're really talking about young people who should have bought insurance and didn't. If you want incentives for people to buy insurance, then there has to be a punishment, right? An incentive system is based on reward and punishment. There has to be some sort of punishment for not buying insurance when you could have when you were younger. If you just pay for it, then there's no incentive. It's a pathway to a government-sponsored program. So I'm glad the individual mandate is gone, but it is not true that Obamacare itself has been taken apart. Now, the same thing is true with regard to DACA. You know, Mitch McConnell is smartly saying that the Republicans should wait on pushing deferred action for childhood arrivals. This would be the Obama executive amnesty that Trump revoked, but then asked Congress to pass again. I guess the Republicans are going to put this off until next year. One of the reasons for that is that they don't want to sort of blot the joy that so many conservatives feel over Republicans finally having a signature piece of legislation. McConnell says they might do DACA next year.
Is DACA on the table?
Senator Schumer and I have already discussed this. No, we'll not be doing DACA but, this week. That's a matter to be discussed next year. The president's given us till March to address that issue. We have plenty of time to do that.
So the point here is that what we could see next year is some programming that we don't like so much. So the last 3 weeks, it's all stuff I like. We may see next year DACA. We may see new subsidies to insurance companies. We may see this giant infrastructure package that Trump apparently still likes talking about. There are other priorities, right? There's welfare reform. That one's on the table. That would be a good one. I'd like to see President Trump pursue that. He's talked about adding more work requirements for welfare. This makes perfect sense to me. He has also talked about maybe restructuring some forms of food stamps in some ways. Again, entitlement programs need to be reformed. The major reforms that need to take place are really the reforms that are happening in areas that he's not going to touch: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. That's the vast majority of the American federal budget. That's the stuff no one is willing to touch. We'll see where the agenda goes from here. But I was talking with a member of the Trump administration last night. And what I said is, I'm really hoping that this is the Trump administration turning the corner. If not, if this is just a high point, I'll celebrate the high point. But, you know, you sort of have to hold off the full-scale celebration until you know where things go next in terms of everything's hunky-dory from here on in, particularly with the approval rating so low. I mean, the fact is that Trump's approval rating is still down in the 30s. Not only has he not suffered any severe crises as president, the economy is doing really well, and he just passed a tax reform package.